You are listening to the 26th broadcast of TBR Radio's TBR History Hour, with your host, TBR contributing editor, Dr. Ed DeVries. On today's show, Dr. Ed interviews radio host James Edwards, host of the weekly Political Cesspool radio show.
James, what I want to start with is I want you to tell us about your radio show, the Political Cesspool. Well, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself, then tell us how you got into the radio, and then tell us how you came upon the name Political Cesspool for a radio show.
Well, I just turned 40 on Monday. I was born in June of 1980 in Memphis to a working class family. My dad was in the construction trade up until his retirement, and I had a very wonderful childhood, one in which I had four loving and supportive grandparents, great parents, who loved me enough to take me to church every Sunday and try to raise me in a very traditional mess. And that's where I marinated for my formative years. They sent me to a private Christian school where that still meant something back then in the 80s, you know, and in the early to mid 90s. And there, everything that was instilled upon me at home and in church was sort of reinforced. But it wasn't until the last 3 years of my high school education when my parents decided to homeschool me. I homeschooled the last 3 years that I really began to get interested in politics. And it was around that time I started watching Crossfire on CNN, and the things Pat Buchanan was saying really started to resonate with me, and I thought that he was saying a lot of things that I found myself to be in agreement with. And it just so happened right around that time, and so much of what happens in life, I think, comes down to timing. But I just had the time on my hands, being there as a late high schooler and then a little bit beyond, to get involved when Buchanan made his last run for the presidency in 1999 and 2000. And I joined that effort and really spent a lot of time working on behalf of that campaign, met a lot of great people there throughout that year and a half. And after that was over, I had just enough of a support network, I guess you could say, to where I wanted to try to continue to fight for a lot of those ideas that he was espousing. And so I launched a bid in 2002 when I was 22 years old for a seat in the Tennessee state legislature. And I ran as an independent in a three-way race and got just under 20% of the vote. And it was from there that the door opened for me to go into radio in 2004. And so for the last 16 years, I've been hosting a talk radio program called the Political Cesspool. And there, I guess you could say the three pillars of our program, or the three things that we're most known for, is standing up for the faith of our fathers, standing up for our Southern patrimony, and indeed talking about racial realities, the likes of which no other conservative on talk radio would dare touch. And I picked the name The Political Cesspool because I didn't want to be vainglorious and call it something predictable like the James Edwards Show. I think there's certainly a swamp that we had hoped the president might drain, and that's sort of where the name came from. Just sort of a play on words, something that would kind of stand out. And you know, if I had it to do over again, maybe we would have come up with something a little more uplifting or appealing, but you got to stick with the one that took you to the dance, and it was under the name of that program that we've made a lot of news and been able to do a lot of good enough to get an invitation to appear with you, Ed, so we had to have done something right over those years.
Well, I see that you advertise in I can't remember the name of it now, which is a shame because I'm one of the editors over there. The Citizens Informer.
The Barger.
And yeah.
Oh, yes. Well, you know, when I first got involved, I knew we wanted to talk about a lot of these issues that other people weren't talking about, at least not in a big way. Now, of course, you fast forward to where we are now, and the amount of content creators are ubiquitous on YouTube and on some of these other podcasts. You can find a lot of people who are talking about issues of race and issues of historical revisionism and things like that. But in 2004, we were virtually the only game in town, and when it came to broadcast media. And I have always wanted to judge a person based upon who I discovered him to be. In other words, I won't let the media's reputation, the reputation someone has been given by the media, deter me from working with someone if I have found them to be an honorable and an honest person. And so I began to look into other groups who were talking about this, maybe not so much in a broadcast capacity, but other organizations like the Council of Conservative Citizens. For instance, you mentioned the Citizens Informer. And I found, I got to tell you, in the mid-2000s, all the way up until Gordon Baum's death a few years ago, I found some of the most wonderful people I've ever met in my life. Salt of the earth, working class, hard-working, God-fearing men and women in organizations like the Council of Conservative Citizens. So that's what I let to be my North Star, I guess. And so I started to work with a lot of these people, and from there, one door opens to another, and you meet more people, and you start to create a little bit of a synthesis. And so I guess we're known for bringing on, as guests, people who wouldn't be given a fair voice on any other program. And it's from there that I've really made some of the most lasting and important relationships and friendships of my entire life.
And I know you're also in association with the Barnes Review, and it's another organization that I'm intimately involved in. And how did you, and of course they're the host and the sponsor of TBR Radio, so how did you come to be involved with the Barnes Review?
The Southern Poverty Law Center, when we first went on the air, not long after we first went on the air, said that I was the nexus of hate in radio, the radio nexus of hate. I, again, just started to look for other people who were telling the truth about certain so-called taboo and controversial topics, and I let that path lead me to where it was going to go. And again, that's what I think I've been most known for over the years, is presenting, promoting these organizations, these publications, these individuals. And I can remember, even before I started the radio program, back during the Buchanan years, meeting people who were at that time subscribers to the Spotlight. And one of them, another gentleman in Tennessee who's since gone on to receive his eternal reward, but he was good friends with Willis Carto. And I can remember going up and meeting Willis in Washington, D.C. And that transitioned over into the American Free Press, and of course the close relationship that the American Free Press and the Barnes Review still have to this day. Meeting Willis for the first time, and then we became acquainted, and then later friends. And of course I would talk with and meet with Willis on occasion, all the way up until his own passing. That's sort of how that started. And again, I'll never shy away from anybody that I believe to be someone of dignity and character. Those are the people I want to work with. There are obviously lies being told about a lot of our friends, about me, about you, about a lot of people we know, but we have to have men of valor who will say, you know what, I'm not going to let a liar distort my opinion of somebody who is worthy of our support. So I've always tried to support those people, and of course I'll continue to do that.
Well, of course, I realize that a lot of the things that you say on your radio show are controversial, as are a lot of the things that we say on this one. But as far as, I think you said the epicenter of hate was what the Southern Poverty Law Center said that you were. As far as, hate speech or inappropriate verbiage on the radio, the FCC is pretty strict about that stuff, and the fines are pretty steep. And after you get hit with a couple of them, they just kick you off the radio. And so the fact that you've been doing it for this many years tells me that you're not actually saying those things, or the government would have had you off radio years ago.
Well, I have always conducted myself as a gentleman. I am a husband. I am the father of two, and our third is on the way. So I want to set a good example for, first and foremost, my wife and children, but also, by extension, what I consider to be my extended family, and that is truly what I consider my listening audience to be. I have formed incredible relationships with so many people that have come to know my work over the years, and again, the best people I've ever met in my life. But no, we're not shock jocks. We don't get on the radio and try to be sensational. We do tell the truth in love, and there is no truth that we shy away from, but we always present it as professionally and as clean and as polished, as reasonable and as heartfelt as possible. And so, of course, there would just certainly be no reason for us to be sanctioned or anything like that. And we've had the support of good people and good men who haven't backed down, and frankly, I don't think that they ever will.
I don't know you personally, and I've only heard a few episodes of your radio show, but from what I have heard on the radio, and then from what I've heard from mutual friends that we have, people whose opinion of you or anybody else I would take a lot of stock in and have a lot of trust in. You know, you said it yourself, you're very much a Christian gentleman, you're very much a family man, you're very much somebody who lives out your faith in your conversation, and, you know, even the times I've been privileged to be able to hear your radio show, you know, I could sense that I was listening to somebody who was a Christian gentleman and who was, as you said, speaking the truth in love. And so I have no doubt, you know, that your pastor obviously saw some fruit and some character in your life, and that's why he made the decision to stand with you and for you when your entire denomination decided that they were going to fight against you. And of course, what I'm talking about is here a few years ago when the Southern Baptist Convention had their all-out war against all things Southern, which, by the way, kind of launched my ministry with Dixie Heritage. You know, just...
Well, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, yes, I was very excited and interested to learn that you, too, have roots that tap into the Southern Baptist Convention. And I would certainly like to learn more about that and talk with you off the air about that and share some stories. But, yes, the church that I was born into was just a very small Southern Baptist church. And I don't think we ran much more than 100 members. But the pastor of that church was the pastor of that church from the time I was born. Okay, and again, I just turned 40 earlier this week, and he was the pastor of my grandparents, my parents, and on and on and on. So I had the opportunity to literally grow up with this man, and so he was much more than a pastor. He was and still is, to this day, a very close friend, a man whose fingerprints absolutely helped shape my upbringing and my life. He was the man who led me to Christ. He was the man who first introduced me to my wife. I met my wife at church. He officiated my wedding. He has presided over the funerals of any family member that I've ever loved that has passed away. I mean, he has just always been there. And he has appeared on the program. I typically have him on around Easter and Christmas to deliver an Easter or a Christmas message. And he's been on a couple of times above and beyond just to kind of shoot the pool. Great guy, great man by any standard of measurement. But yes, there was back in, about 5 years ago, I guess, the Southern Baptist Convention came out with the very reprehensible Russell Moore as their mouthpiece, and decided that they were going to condemn the Confederate flag. I believe what they actually said was that the Christian cross couldn't sit next to the Confederate flag without one setting the other on fire. And the Southern Baptists have been slowly declining for a long, long time. That decline has certainly grown much more precipitous in recent years. But when they said that, I said, you know, I haven't really spoken out against the church, but somebody has got to stand up and say enough, because, I mean, first of all, as far as I'm concerned, that is violating the Fifth Commandment. They are absolutely dishonoring their fathers and mothers. And by the way, those Confederate forebears were far better men, far better Christians than any current leader in the Southern Baptist Convention. I can certainly tell you that. But also, it should be mentioned that the Confederate flag itself is, in fact, a Christian cross. It is obviously modeled off of the flag of Scotland, which is the St. Andrew's cross. Andrew, the apostle of Christ, who was crucified on an X-shaped cross, and that's where you get the Confederate emblem, because so many of our people here in the South came from Scotland and Britain. So I began to speak out about the SBC's condemnation of the Confederate flag. And then from there, of course, it only got much worse. They issued apology after apology for their past, again, shaming their ancestors, apologizing for the whatever racism is considered to be now, I guess you could probably define it as not hating yourself or hating your parents in terms of its modern parlance. And there was a pretty grotesque anti-alt-right, what was then called the alt-right a couple of years ago, where you had this malcontented, frankly white-hating black pastor, Dwight McKissick, of a church in Dallas that's under the umbrella of the Southern Baptist Convention. He had issued this anti-alt-right, alt-right.
Well, as somebody who worked for the Southern Baptist Convention when all that was going on, I can tell you that the black churches that were coming into the Southern Baptist Convention were after one thing, and it was money. But anyways...
Well, that doesn't... Look, no, that doesn't surprise me at all. I certainly don't think they're motivated out of any sense of grievance. I mean, how could they be grievance when these people are just rolling over and laying down? And of course, no amount of contentment or appeasement, or rather no amount of appeasement will ever lead them to contentment. It's always they will take whatever concession you get and then move forward. And it's interesting that the Southern Baptist Convention had said one of the reasons they needed to get rid of the Confederate monument, they signed off on that. The previous president, Steve Gaines, signed off on removing the monument of his hometown in Memphis of Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was, of course, a Christian and a great Confederate leader, came to Christ after the war. But anyway, they say that was a form of idolatry, that it's a stumbling block to our black brothers in Christ, and we all bear the image of Christ, and it's a stumbling block to them for us to have this idolatry for this Confederate flag. But yet now, the Southern Baptist Convention is literally saying that all lives matter is hate speech. The new president of the Southern Baptist Convention, J.D. Greer, has said all lives matter is hate speech. He has said he will not use the gavel that was touched by previous presidents of the Southern Baptist Convention who supported the Confederacy. And this is how far it's gone, all while the muling of some of these radical black malcontents continues unabated. And that's really idolatry to me, Ed, for these people to say you need to get down and bow and ask forgiveness. But yes, all of that was going on, and so I began speaking out about it. And during the course of my speaking out against these things, it caught the ire of Dwight McKissick, the author of these resolutions that the Southern Baptist Convention is all too quick to ramrod through. And he began to lead the charge to have me thrown out of the church. And that brings me to my question, to your point. So it was a couple of years ago now, 2 or 3 years ago. My pastor received a call from the Southern Baptist Convention, and they asked if I was a member of the church. That is, James Edwards a member of your church? And he said, yes, he is. They said, well, we're going to need you to take action against Mr. Edwards. We found him to be an unrepentant racist, and if pastor stopped him, I mean, he told me all of this, so I'm telling you, I wasn't there when the phone call was given, but he told me all of this, and he said, now just hold on, what did James say that you find to be so sinful? They said, well, the Southern Poverty Law Center said, and pastor said, no, I don't want to hear what the Southern Poverty Law Center said. What did he say? What are you taking this as? Well, CNN said. No, I don't want to hear what CNN said. And then they just kept on, well, he's a racist, and, we have condemned the sin of racism, and we're going to need you to take action. And he said, what you're asking me to do is throw James Edwards out of my church. Is that right? Because I want you to be clear. And they said, yes, that's what we're asking you to do. And he said, I can't do that. He said, I've known this man his entire life, and there's no reason for me to discipline him. And if there was, I would. And they said, well, we want you to know that if you don't do that, we're going to have to take action to disfellowship your congregation from the Southern Baptist Convention. And pastor just said, well, do what you need to do. So when he called and told me all that, Ed, I literally came short of begging him. Now, remember, this is a dear friend and a brother, and a man that I've grown up with, a man who has played a significant role in every major moment of my life, from my salvation to my introducing to my wife, funerals, you name it. Middle of the night, 2 a.m., you need him, he's there. one of the greatest men I've ever known. And I almost begged him. I did ask repeatedly. I said, Pastor, I appreciate you saying that, but here's what I would like you to do. I would like you to call them back and just tell them that you're going to do that. Tell them that you're going to dismiss me, and that's fine. I won't hold it personal. I don't want you to have to bear this cross. I don't want you to have to suffer because they're coming after me. And what he said is something, especially with all of the apologizing, all of the simpering, all of the things we're seeing right now. This was the mark of a true man, and this is what he said, and I'll never forget it for as long as I live. He said, James, you know I love you. He said, but I'm not doing this because I love you. He said, I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. And I probably told that story, I don't know how many times, to people who ask me about this, and every time, still to this day, it makes my eyes well up, because there are just not men of character anymore. And all of the institutions, including the church, have fallen victim to what we're seeing. And what ended up happening was, in violation of the biblical instruction for how you should discipline a brother, in the New Testament, there are instructions for how you settle a dispute with a member of the church. The first thing that is supposed to happen is that
you go to the brother specifically. You go to the brother, and then if he won't hear you, you go with two witnesses, and then if he doesn't hear them, then you go to the church.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. And in this case, they called my pastor once and told him to dismiss me, or they would dismiss him. He didn't. And what ended up happening was, they did say they were going to present this to the annual meeting of the Southern Baptist Convention, whatever year that happened. I believe it was 17 or 18. That never happened. What ended up happening was they just removed our church from the rolls. There was no vote. There was no discussion. They removed our church from the Mid-South Baptist Convention's website, and from the other websites in the chain there. Never once, though, to this day, did any member of the Southern Baptist Convention ever contact me personally. Never once. Not ever. So it just goes to show, and I'm not trying to be holier than thou, but this is how deep the anti-white hysteria has manifested itself, even in predominantly white organizations. And the church has not been immune. I mean, I think I always expected more from the church. I certainly expected more from the Southern Baptists, because I grew up with these people. And again, there is a big difference between your average member in a Southern Baptist pew and its leadership. I mean, the leadership is always to the left of the membership. But just because people walk into a church house doesn't mean that all the poison they've been injected with in our decadent society is going to wash away when they cross the threshold of the church building. No, they bring that in there with them, and certainly we have seen that. And the church has become just about as corrupt. I mean, really, Ed, it's like you look at these churches, and it's almost like the Communist Party at prayer is what we're seeing coming out of these churches now. No more, no less than what we're seeing out of academia, media, government, you name it.
Open your web browser and type in www.barnesreview.org and discover the Barnes Review magazine. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There is no more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review magazine in its print form, or in convenient electronic delivery. Our host has been a subscriber to both formats for years. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
Well, did you know Dr. Greg Dixon, or do you at least know who he was?
No, I don't.
Okay, Dr. Greg Dixon was the pastor of the Indianapolis Baptist Temple from sometime in the 1950s until his death here just this past year. But back in, I want to say it was 2001, Dr. Dixon basically was hauled out of his church in a gurney by federal agents after himself and hundreds of his church members had basically camped out in the building for 90-some days. In fact, I was with them for 81 of those days. But Dr. Dixon is also the only person who ever had the distinction of having been impeached as president of the Baptist Bible Fellowship. And
Dr. back in the 50s.
Yeah, Dr. Dixon had also been Jerry Falwell's roommate at Baptist Bible College, and they graduated together. And to hear Dixon tell the story, it was actually Dr. Dixon who started the moral majority, and Jerry Falwell stole it from him. But that's another conversation for another day. But Dr. Dixon, the reason that he was impeached as the president of the Baptist Bible Fellowship was because he dared to get up on the floor of the annual meeting of the Baptist Bible Fellowship, which at that time was almost as large as the Southern Baptist Convention, and was actually sending more missionaries than the Southern Baptist Convention was at that time. But he got up at the annual meeting, and he made the statement. He said, the communists have infiltrated academia. They've infiltrated government. He said, we can prove this. He said, nobody in this room questions that statement. He said, but why would they infiltrate academia? Why would they infiltrate government? Why would they infiltrate the sciences and not infiltrate religion? And so he exposed the then president of the United Methodist Church, the then head in America of the American and World Council of Churches, and several professors at their own Baptist Bible College, one of whom ended up back in 2001, talk about irony of ironies, when he was having his situation with the government. This professor was then the president of the Baptist Bible Fellowship, but he named the names, and he had the dirt. He had dug it up. And the way the Baptist Bible Fellowship is set up, they have what they call a Council of 45. And the Council of 45 impeached him without a vote from the floor because they didn't know, they weren't for sure that the messengers would actually vote to impeach him. So the Council of 45 exercised a very awkward clause in the fellowship's constitution and bylaws and impeached him. But
and what year was that again, Ed?
It was 2001 when Dr. Dixon was drug out of the church. I want to say it was around maybe 83 or 84 that he was impeached from the presidency of the Baptist Bible Fellowship for having exposed communists within the faculty of their seminary, as well as in other denominations as well.
Well, it sounds like a familiar story, that's for sure. And I would rather go down with my honor than to be pat on the head and allowed to continue to quote unquote serve in the capacity of a coward. And I do take some solace in knowing this. All of the support that these people are echoing, I really think it's a mile wide and an inch deep. I mean, the fact of the matter is there are very few people, a very minuscule percentage of the population on either side of the political spectrum who have core, inflexible beliefs that they'll either live or die with. They'll either thrive or suffer for. But no matter come what may, we're not going to move off of those positions. 99% of the country, 99% of the world are just conformists, and they will take the path of least resistance. They would certainly rather maintain their status. So this is a thing that I think has really hurt our people. We don't rely on Christ for our sustenance anymore. We rely on society and the status. We need status like we need water or food or shelter. It is just something that our people have to survive now. And people are going to go with the path of least resistance. They are going to do whatever will keep their life as comfortable as possible. They do not want to be called a racist. Forget sacrificing blood and bone as our ancestors did. And that's another thing, a little parenthetical departure. We need to quit worrying about whether or not we should be ashamed of our ancestors and be more concerned with whether or not our ancestors would be ashamed of us. But I still think, though, that our people are going to turn. I just have a hard time believing that the people who, through God's blessing, Europe was once also known as Christendom. They were synonymous. And I just have a hard time believing that the people who gave so much good to humanity, who invented so much that benefits the entire world, who explored and conquered and discovered and did all of these things, I have a hard time believing that we're going to exit the stage of history the way we see it playing out right now on television, where we're apologizing, we're down on our knees. And if and when that time comes where it turns, and I don't know when it will turn, I don't know what the catalyst will be, but I do think it's going to happen. And when it does, all of these people who are virtue signaling with whatever the media wants to hear right now, they'll fall right back in line. Now, you can't do much with these people because they are so weak and malleable, but it will appear as though if we ever regain power, if the right side ever regains power, that everybody was with us the whole time. And that's just the way people are. That's just the way it is. So it's never actually as dark and probably not ever as good as it appears because of that. But, it's no matter what happens, I'll look back to some of these great men that I think should serve as role models. People like Robert E. Lee, obviously, the great Christian Southerner, who said, do one's duty in all things. You should never do more. You could never do more. You should never wish to do less. No matter what ends up happening, and I am still a happy warrior and an eternal optimist, I'm going to do my duty. And if it was for nothing more than to say at the end of my days I did my duty, well, I'll be able to go to heaven happy. Also, David Crockett said, always be sure that you're right, then go ahead.
Extra, read all about it.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Extra, read all about it.
And I think it is the comfort and security that my faith gives me that I can say, I'm not going to fear what the media says. I know I'm right. I believe that I'm right. I believe that what I'm doing doesn't contradict my faith. I believe that my faith reinforces the actions that I take. And if you have that confidence and you believe that Stonewall Jackson did, that all of this is appointed by God, your days are numbered by God, I mean, how can you worry about the static that you get in the outside world? And so it gives us the opportunity to sort of insulate ourselves with a sense of security to move forward. And I wish, I don't understand why people like me and you can maybe draw those conclusions and have the courage and the confidence to move forward with our work in a very public capacity, and so many others can't. I sure wish I knew, because I tell them how to do it.
Well, Peter said this. He said to fear God and honor the king. But yet Christian people get it backwards. They honor God. In other words, they go to church when it's convenient or when, the governor hasn't closed all the services. They tithe when they've got a little extra money and it's not going to hurt them financially. They witness and they tell other people about Jesus if they can do it without being embarrassed. So they honor God, but they fear the king. They fear the government. And so they get it backwards. Instead of honoring God and fearing the king, or rather instead of fearing God and honoring the king, they honor God, somewhat kind of, but they absolutely fear the king. And I think that's the problem.
Yeah, I asked my pastor about this years ago, because you could see the churches starting to really, really just trim their sails and reconform themselves and their message to whatever would fit the societal norms. And I said, Pastor, what's going on with the churches? I mean, we expected this out of the media. We expected this here, and here, but the churches. And he said, James, he goes, one thing you got to know is not every building with a steeple is a church. And I've used that as well. And of course, now you're going in there and you're imbibing from the pulpit, again, basically the worldview of MSNBC, with a couple of hymns being sung at some point during the hour or two you're there. And then that's really what's going on. The church has not only been poisoned, the church is poisoning its own flock, and we're going to have a reckoning with that too. I mean, you're going to have to get these people out from behind the pulpit. But that's the thing, Ed. I bet we could walk into any Southern Baptist church, any relatively rural Southern Baptist church anyway, maybe not so much the mega churches where they have the Starbucks stand in the lobby, but we could go into any Southern Baptist church and share with them our beliefs. And I guarantee you the majority would fundamentally agree with us and say, yes, you're right on all of these things. And the question is, why aren't any of those people who obviously agree with us, why aren't they challenging their leadership? There is just, it goes back to what you were saying. They fear society. They fear being called a name on Facebook, and they certainly fear if they make too much noise that a camera crew is going to show up at their house. But one of the things that I'm proud about, and we've had a lot of, not financial success, God knows, but we've had success in at least, I think, hopefully setting an example. It's easy for people to say, well, if this happened to me, I'll tell you what I would do. I would give them the what for. I wouldn't back down. And you really never know what you're going to do until it happens. It's easy to say that. I can remember when it happened for me the first time, when we first made national news. It was just a few months after I first went on the air, and we've made a lot of news over the years. And that's the thing. That's the thing that really, if I could hang my hat on one thing, it's that I've never apologized. I've never done these things where you backtrack and you recant, and of course that never helps you anyway. And in fact, it just demoralizes the people that you should be standing up to lead. But when we got the first wave of national news for talking about these ideas, they said, "Well, you've been added to the hate list. You're a hate group leader. What's your reaction to that?" And of course, they expect and they want you to apologize and grovel and kiss the ring. And I was 24 years old when that happened, so I guess it's a kind of a stirring moment for anyone, but certainly a stirring moment for somebody who's much younger than a lot of the. I mean, we've seen it bring senators and heads of major corporations to their knees with a quickness. I was a lot younger than that, and I just said, you know what? I'm ecstatic. You want to know my reaction? I'm ecstatic to be called a hate group leader by these people. I know what I stand for. I know what I don't stand for. I don't think you've arrived as a leader of a traditionalist cause and a leader of traditionalism until you've been attacked by these people. And that's what I said, and that's always been my position. And again, if I can do it and if you can do it, other people can do it too. They just need to. We need some more people doing it.
Welcome to the Christendom curriculum. Every parent who decides to homeschool wants to secure a great education for their child, while also saving time and money. But these days, many parents have another concern. They also want a homeschool curriculum without all the multiculturalist, politically correct diversity doctrine that's really little more than a thin disguise for an anti-Christian, anti-American, and anti-Western civilization bias. Now there is such a curriculum. The Christendom curriculum gives your children a complete education in Bible, history, literature, and more, focusing on the classic academic skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic. But we also tell the story of Christendom, the story of the Christian nations, especially as Christ's kingdom has been historically manifest in the nations of Europe and America, and we do so without apology. The Christendom curriculum is the only Christian nationalist homeschool program you'll find. We support the right of the European and American peoples to their historic Christian cultures against the globalist leftists who want to destroy those cultures. Not only that, but we provide assigned reading courses for various hot-button subjects in our current culture wars, including feminism, social justice, and cultural Marxism, among others. These reading courses will teach your kids how to survive a social justice warrior attack, how to debate with leftists on social media, how to reform their local churches and communities, and more. We're living in a time of tremendous historical and social change. Christians have the opportunity now to begin building the culture and civilization of the next 1,000 years and beyond. It's an exciting time to be alive. So if you want to help raise the next generation of culture warriors, if you want your children to grow up with a love for Christ's kingdom and for their own nation, while at the same time learning how to defend America and rebuild the West, the easy-to-use Christendom curriculum is for you. Click the Learn More button to get in on the action. And thanks for listening.
Here, I guess it's been a few weeks ago now, I had a lady in our church here tell me that the problem that she was having, that I was putting too much of my politics into my preaching and that I needed to separate the two. And, my response to her was, my politics and my faith don't function separately of one another. If anything, it's my understanding of the Scripture that has given me the political persuasion that I have.
Well, that's always been a thing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. And so I was going to say, I said, so the problem isn't that I'm putting my politics into my preaching. I said, the problem is that if you disagree with what I'm preaching, then one of us has a very wrong worldview.
Well, that's right. And that's another thing that for so long has shackled the church. The church will say, well, that's a political issue, and, we don't want to lose. They don't actually say we don't want to lose our 501c3 tax-exempt status, but no, politics, we're just kidding. But they will absolutely, even the so-called conservative churches and denominations, will absolutely get in the tank for Black Lives Matter and condemning, the sin of racism. And by the way, we're not saying you should go out and hate anybody for anything. Hate, because of their skin color. I don't know anybody who has ever done that. But, can you not use the sense of reason and the faculties that God gave you to understand that, yes, there are differences amongst the different elements of humanity? I mean, are we supposed to, we have to hate our ancestors now in order to be good Christians? No, I don't go along with that. But the churches absolutely will get into politics as long as it's a political view that reinforces the regime. It's just that there are very few who will cross the threshold of politics if it contradicts what you might see on the media. Again, and that goes back to fearing man more than God. But there are good pastors out there. There are good members of the church out there. I mean, obviously there's people like Chuck Baldwin. There's people we just had on the show, my program just this last week. Jesse Lee Peterson, number one, and then also a gentleman by the name of Pastor Brett McAtee, who's the pastor of a brick-and-mortar church in Michigan, who came on to really talk very strongly about these issues with scriptural reinforcement, which I always like to do. Again, we are a political talk show, but like you said, and I love that you said that, I can't separate my spiritual heritage from my cultural heritage. They complement one another, and so while we don't bring on a pastor to deliver a sermon every week, at least once a quarter, I would say, we do try to bring on someone like that who can reinforce our position using the Bible. And again, I think through that lens, everything really comes into focus.
Well, I know, one of the areas that I got into trouble with recently, and I say that, the civil authority gave me very little grief. It was people within the church and within the denomination that I had to deal with. But, when all the churches around us were closing, I kept going. And I was even saying, on my other radio show, my old Camp Meeting Time radio show, that if you're attending a church where your pastor has closed it, when he reopens, don't go back, go somewhere else. If your pastor's not man enough to do the things that he knows are right, because to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin, then you're going to the wrong church, and you just need to find one that's open right now, and you need to jump into it and obviously stay there, for the long haul.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because this has been such an unprecedented year, what with the riots and the insurrection obviously taking over and gobbling up all the headlines over the course of the last couple of months. But it almost makes us forget, and I guess we're still dealing with it, that the first part of this year was nothing but coronavirus. And I was never, from the jump street on that, I was never concerned about it. You instinctively believe, you instinctively learn that the media does lie to you about everything. But I believe that perhaps it was a new upper respiratory illness that didn't seem to be too potent, and the reaction to that was just so over the top and ludicrous that it really defied belief. And I still don't know if it was just a case study to see how quickly they could get people to surrender their rights and surrender their logic to the state. But we did talk about all of the churches. I mean, can you imagine? Liquor stores could be open, abortion mills could be open, but a church. Now, what do you need more? If it truly was a pandemic of some plague that had the opportunity to really kill a lot of people, would you need that last six-pack, or would you need the salvation that you find in Jesus Christ? So what's more important in a time like that, a church or some of these other institutions that were allowed to remain open, and to see all of the churches voluntarily closed because the state suggested it? I mean, can you imagine? And the day will come. And by the way, all of these so-called Christian leaders who have surrendered and succumbed to the anti-white, really anti-Christian narrative, they're going to come for them too. And when they do come, and when they really start to persecute the church, what kind of leadership are we going to find? We've already seen that the church will close its doors for the flimsiest of pretenses. What kind of leadership are we going to be getting from the church when the day comes where they really start tightening the screws on Christians? If what we've seen so far this year is any indication, it doesn't instill a lot of faith that we're going to have strong men leading us into uncertain times.
Hello, I'm Tom Strain, Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. The Confederate flag, Confederate symbols, and the reputation of our Confederate ancestors has come under attack. The Sons of Confederate Veterans is actively fending off our detractors, but there is only so much that we can do. We need your help. Contact your local, state, and national elected politicians and tell them that you will not tolerate these attacks on our heritage. You can also visit scv.org, download an application to join us in our fight to preserve our Southern heritage. Visit scv.org today. If you don't have a Confederate ancestor and you are tired of American history disappearing, you can assist us by becoming a friend of the SCV. Please visit scvheritagedefense.org and make a donation to the Heritage Defense Fund. We hope that you will join us in the fight to defend the Confederate soldiers' good name.
Maybe I'm wrong, and you're in a better position maybe to observe these things and to comment on them than I am, or at least you could probably do so with a little more articulation. But this is my personal belief, because the question that I keep hearing, and even with my Dixie Heritage newsletter, I get a lot of emails, people asking, when is the counter-revolution going to take place? When is the, for example, say the Southern Heritage movement going to start, pushing back in defense of the monuments that are coming down left and right at the moment and so forth? When are the good people in America going to stand up and say enough is enough? And I really think that we were on the brink of that. For example, in Michigan there, several thousand armed citizens basically walked into their Capitol building and told their state legislatures enough is enough. And of course, when they did that, the media went crazy. They were neo-Confederates, they were neo-Nazis, they were, a hateful, all the names that they called them. But yet when literal mobs are burning down our cities, of course, they're protesters, and their cause is portrayed as righteous and so forth. But anyways, My point being is that I think the good people of America were to that place where they were just about to stand up and take their country back. And fearing that, I believe that the riots and everything that we're seeing now were stirred up. And because that happened, people like you and me and the people that we would reach on our radio shows, the people we go to church with, the people we, our neighbors and so forth, they'll never rise up now because rather than doing that, they're about to start yelling to the government that they would have rose up against to protect them from what's going on right now, and the result will be more tyranny. And it's as though our government and the powers that be within it have used freedom to destroy freedom.
Well, Ed, they really do tie together. The COVID hysteria and the riots, and I'll make a point very quickly about that. And maybe you're right, because, obviously this whole thing that got kicked off, the George Floyd thing, they took that accident and turned it into a worldwide phenomenon, and the media has the power to do that. Of course, we should remember, if he hadn't resisted arrest, if he hadn't been engaged in the apparent perpetration of a crime, if he hadn't been on drugs, he would still be alive. But in any event, yes, that certainly sucked the air out of any sort of resistance our side was doing with regards to the COVID scheme. But I would say this: violence works for the other side. This other side is completely supported. This revolution was made possible by corporate America. If they pretend as though, and I'm talking about Black Lives Matter, Antifa, etc., these insurrectionists, these rioters out on the streets, they act as though they're railing against the system. They are supported and propped up and sponsored by the system. Churches, government, media, corporate America, they're all in the tank. These people are revolutionaries. They're agents of the state. But violence works for them because of that, and the police are standing down. What a despicable shame to see what law enforcement has been reduced to. But I would say this for our people: what's going on right now is making the case for us far more persuasively than people like me and you ever could. We can talk about it. Millions of people are seeing this and don't believe that the vast majority are in the tank for the narrative we see propagated by the media. Our people are not speaking out, and there is a very real threat of losing one's job, losing one's livelihood. I'm not saying that just because people aren't standing up and speaking out that there aren't valid reasons for them not doing that. But I would say do not go out and engage right now. Obviously, if you go out and you think you can take the same sort of action that the left is doing and get away with it just because they are, you'll see very quickly that there will be selective law enforcement. The police will come down on you. You will go to jail forever if they don't let them kill you, which is, they've ceded half of downtown Seattle to these people. And it's interesting, too, we've seen it. The whole COVID hysteria, not one mention of COVID or social distancing or any of that other stuff with regards to the rabble out there burning down cities. It's not a problem. But then I think in London and in a couple of very, very small cases elsewhere, there were people who had gotten together to protect monuments, even the monuments of leftist whites like Winston Churchill and Abraham Lincoln. And then the narrative on that was far-right demonstrators violate COVID restrictions, because you had a handful of people trying to stop the mob from tearing down these beautiful works of art. So, no. Number one, not everybody's going along with this. I really think that people are becoming much, much more aware and learning that no amount of capitulation is going to curry you favor. I am a man of action. If I had lived in 1861, I would have signed up for the Army. I would have fought in the war on behalf of the South. But that's not the option we are presented with right now. If you go out and try to do something foolish, engage in violence or advocate violence, you will either be killed or you will go to jail forever. Your family will be deprived of you. Do not do anything lawless that involves any sort of lawlessness. Do not advocate it right now. I'm not saying stand down and do nothing. I'm just saying you have to wait for opportunities to present themselves and look to apply yourself in any way that you can. For me, the way I feel as though I can make the biggest positive impact is with my program. That's the opportunity that was presented to me. Look for those open doors in your own life. And if there is nothing you can do, because, listen, I mean, people are getting fired left and right. I've even seen stories about people getting fired, not because they said anything to contradict the Black Lives Matter movement, but because they didn't say anything at all.
Well, there was a lady, I don't remember her name, but she was fired from her job at a bank in Atlanta the other day simply because she was the stepmother of a police officer.
Now, see, I have not heard that. I will make mention of that. But that's how far the line has been redrawn now. So you may very well be in a position like that. And listen, it's counterproductive for you to go out and make a tweet on or a comment on Facebook that will get you fired and will cause your family to suffer. You don't do anything foolhardy and reckless. But what you can do, perhaps, is support individuals and organizations who do have the opportunity to do that through God's grace. And I would encourage you to do that right now. We can't hasten the day for us to have a wonderful chance to impact change very quickly. Sometimes you have to bide your time and wait while being vigilant and supporting others who are out there on the front lines. And everybody can do that. Everybody can do that right now. And to that end, I would say support the work of Ed DeVries, support the Barnes Review, support these other organizations because there's not that many of them, ladies and gentlemen.
Yep. Well, I know I interviewed your co-host here a few weeks ago, and he was telling me that, your radio show, for example, wouldn't exist if it weren't for some people who are gracious enough to support it financially.
Oh, well, that's certainly right. We don't have commercial sponsors, that's for sure. It doesn't cost, relatively speaking, to our opposition. I mean, you're talking about pennies on the dollar, but it certainly costs more to run a program and run an organization than we could fund out of our own pockets. So, yes, we do. You can still send checks in the mail. You can still send money orders. You can still do things like that. And like I said, there's not too many organizations out there that are worthy of it. I'd like to submit ours is one, but certainly there are others, and I just mentioned a couple of them.
Was there a question that I didn't ask you, or was there something that you wanted to say and I didn't give you the introduction for it?
Oh, Ed, we could talk for a day, 2 days. We could just talk for a week without a stop, and we wouldn't necessarily cover it all. But no, I think we at least covered the high points. I certainly was excited that, not a lot of people, not everyone, I should say, shares on the faith. So it's always fun to come on and talk about some of those somewhat esoteric topics that are near and dear to my heart, and share some stories that hopefully somebody can relate to.
Well, I do appreciate you coming on, especially given the fact that your wife, I'm assuming, is she expecting today, or is this just a prenatal visit?
No, not today. That really would have been ambitious of me to squeeze a radio interview in on the day. But no, she's about midterm. She's 22 weeks expecting, and we'll have another little baby here in October. We have a 10-year-old daughter, a 5-year-old son. So we're going to get above replacement level fertility on this one. And, interestingly, that's one of the things when the media ever attacks me, one of the things that they almost always use as a reason for why I'm such an evil guy is because we have said publicly that we hope that the family will increase our birth rate to replacement fertility and beyond. In other words, that we would dare advocate that our people be able to survive. And I've never asked anybody to do something that I wasn't willing to do or hadn't done for myself. So having 3 children was something that was, at least 3 was something that was important to me, and we're just about there.
Well, that's good. That's good. And I appreciate you being on the show today, and Of course, at any time, if there's something that you want to get out there, give me a call, and we'd be happy to have you back on.
Well, thank you so much, Ed. It's really been an honor, and I appreciate you giving me the time. We'd love to have you on ours to do a reciprocal type of deal, and it's always fun and productive to network and collaborate with men who are doing the jobs most Americans refuse to do. And thank you for being one of them.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'd be happy to be on the Political Cesspool. I guess we'll have to just set up a time when we can do that.
We'll do it soon.
All right, then. And on that note, we are out of time for this week's TBR Radio Presents the TBR History Hour. I do hope that you'll go to James's website, thepoliticalcesspool.com. Check out his great radio show, and it is indeed worthy of your financial support, as is TBR Magazine and the Barnes Review. If you are able to support any of these great efforts, we encourage you strongly to do so. You can go to the Barnes Review at www.barnesreview.org. Once again, www.barnesreview.org.